Tonight, the runway lights in Alaska cut through the dark like a lie detector, cold, bright, unforgiving. Two men arrive carrying decades of unfinished history and one very crowded agenda: a grinding war in Europe, a frayed rulebook that once kept borders still, and a nuclear clock that's losing minutes fast. We've heard the promises: peace in a day, strength through deals, managed competition. We've watched the practice: praise traded for leverage, tariffs for compliance, silence where red lines used to be loud. This summit is not a reunion. It's a referendum on whether power gets to rearrange maps and call it peace, on whether the last guardrails on the world's deadliest weapons are rebuilt or ripped out, on whether Ukraine is a participant in its future or a bargaining chip in someone else's victory speech. Tonight, we strip the theater from the substance. First, the worldview that binds Trump and Putin more than any memo ever could: power over rules, deals over norms. Then, the one deliverable that they can land before the New START fuse burns out. A framework that stops a fresh nuclear arms race before it starts. I'm Hala Al-Hamalawi and you're watching In Focus. The Economist argues that the real collusion isn't a secret dossier, but a shared power politics instinct. Rules are optional, leverage is king. It notes that Trump's past recognitions of conquered land, the Golan Heights, the Western Sahara, and his recent misusings about land swaps for Ukraine, an approach that risks normalizing gains by force. If Alaska yields a peace, will it be peace by partition? Well, we'll have to just wait and see. Meanwhile, Russia has just lifted its self-imposed INF moratorium, hinting that it can place intermediate-range missiles wherever it likes, escalation by posture, even as it dangles talks. That's leverage at the table before the first handshake. For more analysis, we're joined from London by Mr. Babak Imamyan, economist and political analyst. Welcome, Mr. Imamyan, to Qnews. Now, if, as The Economist suggests, Trump and Putin share a great men make the rules mindset, what does that actually produce in Alaska? Ceasefire or a map rewrite with a new label?
Well, thank you for your question. Now, let's take it from the President Trump perspective. First of all, he does not need to be there. This is a European war. This is a European problem.
Exactly.
President Trump could easily walk away, have a cordial relations with Europe and Russia, supply both sides, and make huge amount of money meanwhile. But the reason why he's doing that, because he actually believes that he is the peace president. He is the peace and prosperity president. And that's why he's committing to that. So this is what we have to look. So the worst scenario for Europe and Russia would be if President Trump walks away. This war would continue forever till both sides are totally exhausted. So I'm just saying how great President Trump is in this case, while a lot of Western media are just criticizing him continuously.
So, given Trump's history recognizing the Golan and Western Sahara, how likely is a settlement that implicitly rewards territorial conquest in Ukraine, and what precedent does that set beyond Europe?
Well, President Trump believes in not only peace, but prosperity. What does prosperity mean is making money, trade. And he thinks which side would actually generate more revenue for whatever land that they are occupying. because he thinks the peace will have a more lasting effect if the commerciality of peace is greater than war. If there is no commerciality, there is no prosperity, war will re-emerge. That is how President Trump looks at it. So looking at it, how he could have a peace, actually a trade treaty. He's looking more than anything else. Let me just say, this is not a summit about Ukraine. This is a U.S.-Russia summit, full stop.
Yes. So, yes, sir. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, and there is one important aspect to it, that there is a trade treaty worth $3 trillion between U.S. and Russia, which is being now negotiated right now, especially on energy sector. So that there is that important aspect which nobody's is not being covered fully.
So if land swaps are floated, is that a de facto abandonment of the post-1945 norm against changing borders by force? What stops copycats elsewhere?
I mean, I've heard that many times. We've heard Munich 1938 many times. It's just like Munich 1938 when the British gave in to Adolf Hitler, and then they say that was the cause of the World War II, the start of the World War II, appeasement of that side. We've heard that conversation many times, and we've heard that also the Russia threat, that there is that Russia threat that tomorrow they'll be in London. Now, Russia cannot even go as far as Kiev. I don't know how they are saying that Russia is such a threat to European security in such way. Historically, if you look at it, when Nazi Germany wanted to invade Poland, they needed something like 3 million troops. This is 1939. Back then, they needed 3 million. For Russia to have a serious attempt to actually have a war against Western Europe, they would need an army of at least 15 million people. It's just not there. I mean, these Russia threat, when you break it down mathematically, the numbers are not there, yet it's being mentioned constantly.
Well, Trump has toggled between pressure and praise. Do tariff threats and sanctions relief talk add up to a coherent bargaining strategy, or a series of mixed signals that Putin can gain?
Well, Europeans, they just like to talk. They just like to have conferences. They have no action. So there is that side of jealousy when it comes to President Trump. On the contrary, President Trump just likes to have action, to resolve things and to move on, to show something for his actions. Yet the politicians, they like playing politics. They like grandeur and pretending that they are doing something rather than doing something. And I think that's a big friction between these career politicians in Europe and actually a businessman now has become a politician as a President Trump.
Sir, now with Moscow scrapping its INF restraint days ago, is Russia building an escalade to negotiate ladder or preparing for a longer standoff regardless of any Alaska communiques?
Well, Russia's priority is to actually end this war as soon as possible and commit to economic development. That's what Russia wants. But they want to. The most important thing for Russia is security guarantees. We talk about Ukraine having security guarantees. We don't discuss what is Russia's security guarantees. Russia wants to have U.S. security guarantees that NATO will not attack Russia.
Yes.
That would be the first thing on the agenda today.
Yes. Well, speaking of guarantees, Zelensky's exclusion risk. If Ukraine isn't in the room today, what guarantees can prevent a deal about Kiev rather than with Kiev? What would credible security guarantees even look like?
Well, we've got to accept that there is a limit to every country how much they can do on their own. So they need to form alliances or work under the umbrella of this country or that country. Now, Ukraine has to trust what United States is doing for it. If they have no trust what President Trump is doing for them, then they should say it officially and then look for some other solution or do it on their own. That would be the way to go forward.
So, endgame honesty. If the summit produces only a truce or a freeze, what does that mean for civilians, for reconstruction? What does it mean for Europe's security costs over the next 12 months?
Well, it'll be good time for you and I, because this normalization of US and Russia helps reducing the threat of a nuclear conflict. This is good for the world peace. We want nuclear superpowers to be on good terms with each other. And this was the mentality during the Cold War. The Cold War had two objectives. One was to nuclear superpowers don't go into war with each other. And number two, there will be no communist takeover. These were the objectives. Unfortunately, we've lost that. The European leaders have no hesitation going for a nuclear war now. They keep threatening nuclear powers and so. And also, most of the European governments are now left of politics. They are taken over by left of politics. And they still have that sort of mentality, left or communist mentality. So that's where we are right now in 2025.
Well, Mr. Babak Imamian joining us from London, thank you so much for your valuable analysis. Now, if Alaska writes a truce without a principle, the map may hold for now. But the rule that protects every border on Earth will not. From great power instincts to great power limits, amid talk of peace, a nuclear clock is ticking. New START expires in February 2026. Without a bridge, the world's two biggest arsenals go unconstrained, inviting planning for the worst. Can Alaska deliver at least a floor under the free fall? Just have to wait and see. Politico's case is clear. A clean Ukraine peace is out of reach tonight, but a nuclear guardrails package is not. The doable prices are political, not treaty grade. Restate the nuclear war cannot be won. Voluntarily stick to New START ceilings after expiry. Pledge no explosive testing. Freeze tactical nukes at current levels. Avoid provocative INF class deployments and nod to missile defense restraint. So neither side builds towards fantasy invulnerability. None of this solves the trenches, but it buys time and a path back to inspections when politics allows. Why this matters now? If New START lapses into nothing, planners on both sides must size for worst-case assumptions or scenarios. More warheads budgeted, more delivery systems queued, more alerts, more misread signals. A modest political package, even without immediate counting rules, can hold the line. Keep arsenals from spiking, keep testing norms intact, and keep Europe and Asia from becoming missile parking lots while negotiators, scientists, and the militaries sketch a veritable follow-on. Joins us now from London is Nora Lee Nodzon, Republican analyst tracking Trump's national security calculus and Hill politics. Good to have you with us here on Qnews. And let me start by asking you, Mrs. Nora, what's the minimum Alaska must produce to be more than a photo op one sentence on deterrence, a voluntary cap, or an, let's say, instruction to negotiators with dates and metrics?
Well, firstly, it's great to be here today. I think it's a historic day. The fact that Putin and Trump are meeting face to face in Alaska indicates to me that there is going to be some progress made today hopefully on a framework for peace between Russia and the Ukraine. And then secondly, talking about the START treaty, which is due to expire in February of 2026. Since Russia and the US control 90% of the nuclear arms in the world, it is important that they also discuss a framework for extending this treaty.
So, Mrs. Noura, let's elaborate about the treaty, about the START treaty. Now, if both sides stay under the new START numbers post February 2026, how do we verify anything while formal inspections are suspended? Does Washington accept national tech means plus ad hoc visits?
I think that's a very good question you ask. And I think in light of all the new developments with AI and technology, it is very important that there is a framework in place to check everything, but also to have more security measures so that nothing is accidentally launched. I do believe there is alignment between Russia and the US on not wanting a nuclear arms race. And I believe the countries agreed several years ago that nobody wins if there's a nuclear war, and everybody's aligned on that. So putting a framework in place that works for everyone, that gives us that comfort, is a win for both sides.
Okay, so is a freeze without counting rules meaningful or just a press release? How would the United States sell that to Congress and NATO without data exchanges?
So having just a freeze and no counting rules, well, it could be the first part in a process to get it in place. Remember, we're only in August, so we do have until February, and breaking the ice on that now is fantastic.
Okay, so Moscow says that it's no longer bound by any INF constraints. What would a credible reciprocal restraint statement look like? What triggers snapback responses if deployments begin?
I'm sorry, what was the last part of your question?
I was asking you, what triggers snapback responses if deployments begin?
So what would trigger a snapback response if deployment begins? I think that's a very good question. And that would have to be worked out. I think the main thing is that both countries want to discuss extending the treaty and a process that works for both sides. And, that won't be the only thing. I think the fact that they're there to discuss peace is a framework that we have. Peace means that we also have a good framework for controlling nuclear weapons.
Okay. So, Mrs. Noura, can the Trump team acknowledge mutual vulnerability without undercutting its own missile defense agenda? And is there a trade that protects U.S. homeland defenses while also calming escalation risks?
I think the whole world has mutual vulnerability. We're all vulnerable if there's a nuclear arms race, if there were a nuclear war. So that is already inherent. That shouldn't be debated. And for the rest, again, I think each side has 5 team members with them. For me, that's a very positive sign because it shows commitment to work through the issues. The fact that they're starting at 11 o'clock and the meeting's supposed to go on for at least 6 hours, there's going to be plenty of time to discuss all of these outstanding issues.
Okay, so if Alaska births a U.S.-Russia framework, how do you keep Beijing from exploiting gaps? Or do you find China in later via parallel assurances on testing and hypersonics?
Apologies, I didn't quite hear the question. You're talking about China also testing?
Yes, I was asking you now, if Alaska births a U.S.-Russia framework, let's assume that, how do you keep Beijing from exploiting gaps? How can we keep China from exploiting the gaps? Do you fold China in later via parallel assurances on testing and hypersonics?
I think it's very easy to use economic diplomatic means to get China as well to play along. Again, it's the US and Russia which are the dominant players when it comes to nuclear. I think anything that's economic works with China. So
Okay.
I wouldn't be as concerned about that as I would about getting the framework in place with Russia.
Okay, fair enough. What's the congressional path for any follow-on treaty? Do you keep this at the level of executive branch political commitments first to stabilize the latter and bring NATO along?
I think that's a good question. Yes, you start at the executive branch. I think when Trump has a platform, he's able to get NATO on board. He will be able to get the congressional branch on board as well. I don't think that's the big concern right now. Again, it just goes back to having the correct framework that works between the two leaders.
Okay. How does a Trump White House frame voluntary caps and testing restraint to the GOP hoax? Now, trust but verify plus funded modernization without looking concessional to Moscow. How can we do that? How can they do that?
I think that's a very good question. It will remain to be seen, but I'm confident that they will find a solution forward. You know, there's so much advances in the way things can be done. So I'm confident about that.
Okay. If Russia breaches a political package, what snapback triggers and tools would you want spelled out now? Targeted sanctions, rotational deployments, larger NATO/US exercises, or something else?
I think economic would probably be a key part of that. If you look at the delegation that Putin has, he has a lot of people on the business side. And as Trump said, there's going to be no business to discuss until first they've got peace. So I think business is at the heart of what Putin's trying to accomplish right now. He doesn't want to be isolated from the world anymore. So I do believe using economic levers is a good way to keep that in balance.
Okay. If Washington and Moscow hold a new start levels while China expands, do we risk a lopsided triangle? What's a realistic on-ramp for Beijing? Parallel, no test pledges, hypersonic transparency, or trilateral hotline first? Because you excluded China a little bit from the talks now, right?
Yes, and of course, as I said, 90% of nuclear weapons are held between Russia and the US. I don't think it's appropriate for China to be a part of these discussions right now because the framework for the discussions is peace between Russia.
Yes, but it's not about the discussions, Mrs. Nora. It's about actually practicing or being part of the race without being part of the negotiations or the deal.
Usually what you see in any negotiation, the two stronger players, they set the terms of the negotiation, and then they bring the smaller players or the ones that are not as big
directly involved, right?
They come afterwards. So it's always easier to get two to agree and then get the third on board once two have agreed, because it's harder to stay out of the mix. Okay. So as I said, I'm less concerned about China. I don't think China really doesn't want any problems. China just wants their economy to grow. They want to flourish. So right now, the key issue that most people are thinking about is Russia and the US agreeing.
Okay. Should Alaska launch a working group on artificial intelligence, cyber and space, including, of course, human-in-the-loop commitment for nuclear C2 and a pledge not to target early warning satellites to keep a crisis from turning into a countdown? What do you think about that?
I think that's a very interesting idea. I actually like the sounds of that.
Mm-hmm. What date-certain deliverables would prove Alaska is not just mood music, principles directive within 7 days? U.S.-Russia risk reduction working group convened in 30, verified hotline test in 45, and a draft verification menu in 90.
I apologize. I didn't hear the question.
Yes, I was asking you, Mrs. Nora, about what date-certain deliverables would prove that Alaska is not just an agreement or a memorandum, but actually something doable between the United States and Russia.
Look, if it's something doable, they will continue to work on it. They do have time. I think if there's an alignment that they want, that it's important, the START treaty is important, they will get their team members to work on it. There is going to be a press conference, and we will see what comes out of that press conference. A lot of people think this is just Trump, meeting with Putin, and Putin's just playing Trump and trying to buy time. I actually disagree. I think there will be a lot of productive things to come out of it on the nuclear front, on the war with Ukraine front. I think this is changing the tone of the relationship between Russia and the West and the conversation.
Okay. How can Putin and Trump pursue restraint on INF range systems while also reassuring Poland and NATO's nuclear sharing host that deterrence isn't thinning? What concrete reassurances moves offset any perceived trade-offs?
I'll be quite honest. I believe if that we can achieve peace with the Ukraine and Russia right now, that should assure Poland and other countries of this war expanding further. As we know, both sides are exhausted. And I think part of the fact is Russia is economically drained. Their military is exhausted. So they are of the mindset that they do want to do deals that will be favorable. And Putin also likes Trump and will also look to give him a couple of wins to bring back to the U.S.
Okay, so would you support a reciprocal commitment to extend decision time? For example, pulling a defined share of forces off launch on warning with annual public reporting, so it's measurable, reversible, and does not undercut deterrence?
If they can extend the delivery time, you said?
Yes.
I think that could be acceptable, yes.
Okay. What are your expectations from that summit? Your personal expectations?
I have positive expectations. This is the first time the two leaders are going to be meeting since Trump came into power. The fact that they're meeting in Alaska, which was former part of Russia, and it was Abraham Lincoln, who's one of the, Trump is one of the big fans of Abraham Lincoln. He bought that from Tsar Alexander for $7 million. I think there's a lot of ceremony that's showing there's positive signs here. The fact that each side has 5 team members, there's positive work they want to do. Trump has said that, without, peace and a true deal, essentially nothing else is going to happen. Mm-hmm. So, and part of that framework is also addressing the START treaty and thinking about it expiring in February. I think both sides want progress. They're not going to spend the time there if they don't want progress.
Okay. My final question to you, Mrs. Noura. Apart from the START treaty, what would be the thorny issues in this negotiation?
What would be the
thorny issues?
The thorny issues, I think there will be a lot of thorny issues. I think the biggest thorny issue is clearly on the peace between the Ukraine and Russia and any potential land swap, which is not allowed according to the constitution of Ukraine. I think that's going to be the thorniest issue of all. In addition to Ukraine joining NATO, that was part of the problem.
That was the start, the main reason for the war.
Exactly. And Europe has been very strong saying Ukraine is a sovereign country. They have the right to join NATO. They're moving forward with the process. Trump has taken a step back and has acknowledged that, in fact, it was the membership of Ukraine into NATO that really was the red line that was crossed.
Yes.
So Trump has that in mind. That's a thorny issue. I know Zelensky and Europe are stressed right now because that's a sticking point for them.
Yes.
How this gets resolved, that's the question.
Exactly, and we'll just have to wait and see.
perhaps there can be some sort of agreement. Maybe Ukraine can join NATO, but NATO agrees not to attack Russia, or maybe Ukraine doesn't join NATO, but it has security guarantees from the US.
Exactly. Yes.
There are ways around this, but
Yes.
that's going to be one of the biggest issues.
Yes. I'd like to thank you so much, Mrs. Nora Lee Knudsen. Thank you so much for joining us here on Q News. If the summit delivers even thin guardrails, it won't be peace, but it will be the difference between managed rivalry and a free fall into guesswork with missiles. We'll judge Alaska by what follows, not the photo. Will the communique avoid trading territory for quiet? Is there any concrete step towards nuclear guardrails, voluntary caps, testing restraints, or a path back to verification? Do deployments ease, and is Ukraine part of the follow-up? We'll track those points along with the allied consultations and, of course, timelines, and report what changes, what doesn't, and what still needs clarity. Thank you so much. You were watching In Focus with me, Al Hamalawi. I thank you so much for watching. Good night.